Hi, and welcome to this episode of ThePrint's national security show, Crosshairs. I'm Praveen Swami, I'm National Security Editor. We're recording this on an extraordinary day of chaos in Pakistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan, as you will have seen overnight, attacked in an apparent assassination attempt. Imran Khan was injured, and at least 9 other people in his party have been as yet. We thought we would step back and take a look at some of the bigger context in which this drama in Pakistan is taking place. And that context is the meltdown in Afghanistan. My colleague Suchet Vir Singh has been reporting on an extraordinary new report from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Organized Crime, which tells us that under Taliban rule, heroin production, opium production is going up to record levels. The UN ODC has also been warning for some time that these drug supplies are spiraling across the region and of course contributing to the chaos in Pakistan. Suchet, could you just talk us through quickly what this report says?
Yeah, briefly, I'll just get into it. So this report is the UN yearly report on drug cultivation in Afghanistan, specifically looking at opium. And this has been going on since 1994. Specifically for this year, they've monitored that since Taliban took over Kabul last year, there has been a 32% increase in the amount of area cultivated for opium. And specifically under that, 233,000 hectares of land have been used for cultivating opium in Afghanistan. Of course, the majority is within the southwestern region of the country, which is the province of Helmand, where nearly 20% of land, arable land, has been used for opium cultivation. And reports are also suggesting that it's no longer limited to opium. There is a plant which has been found, there is a shrub which is growing wildly around Afghanistan, through which even heroin and crystal meth is now being produced. And while since the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban has completely destroyed their former economy, they don't have access to their foreign reserves, etc., and the economy has contracted by 5%, this sort of illegal economy, illegal drug trade is absolutely booming. And that's what the UN is pointing towards.
Thank you for that fantastic introduction, Suchet. Anand Arni, former officer at the Cabinet Secretariat, a man who knows Afghanistan, Central Asia, Pakistan very well online. Mr. Arni, I thought I could begin by asking you, what is this sort of presumably these flows of opium and this crystal methamphetamine mean that the Taliban and other jihadi groups are getting substantial revenue despite, international sanctions. What does this mean for Pakistan and for the wider Indian Ocean region?
For Pakistan, it means that there would be a lot of the drug mafia who are involved in all this trafficking will benefit from it. The routes for the consignments to reach the outside world, one of the routes would be through Karachi. That's been a traditional route. The route is already up to Karachi, lined with Pashtun. It's become a Pashtun town now. Virtually, there will be effects on the demographic. There will be effects on Karachi. There will be effects on the demographic situation. And there are going to be a lot of drug barons who are going to make enormous amount of money. And that's going to fuel more of it. I don't see it happening. I mean, I'm not talking per se about Pakistan. I would say for the larger region, I think you probably need to take that up at a later stage. It's not Pakistan which is going to pay a price. Pakistan will extract revenue. The price will be paid by Iran, Russia, primarily, and the Central Asian countries, and of course, India.
That's really disturbing. Tara Kartha was an analyst at our National Security Council, an expert on small arms proliferation. And Tara, I wanted to ask you, what do these, where there are drugs, guns are usually a short distance behind. A lot of worries after the fall of Kabul that these small arms would proliferate across the region. Do these UN figures about a sharp uptick in the drug trade concern you, that they might lead to the strengthening of various criminal mafias who might ship out guns to the wider region?
No, No, I don't think so, really, because Afghanistan is already as awash with guns as it can get. Is it moving out of Afghanistan? Probably. We also know there's a huge trove of weapons with the US left behind. Is that moving out? Probably. But does it have a link with drugs? Not necessarily. What is actually is worrying is that, you see, the Taliban itself is a kind of an organized crime syndicate. So a bunch of them are directly involved. Everybody knows that they are involved in this thing. And this incidentally, you mentioned that they ordered a ban on the drug trade, I think April 2nd or something like that. That is to be implemented by the Ministry of Interior. And who is the head of the Ministry of Interior? He's Haqqani himself. And his men are inside within the Kabul bank, the Afghan bank, DAB bank, as you call it, one Abdul Bashir, if I remember correctly. That is one of his men who's within the bank. So everybody wants a share of the loot, right? So they've got the Kandahar lot have got their own men inside. So everybody wants this money. Second is, when that ban came into effect, so to speak, the prices of the prices shot up. So in one way it makes sense, because the Afghan farmers made a lot of money. So that's there. But then so did the Taliban.
So, ma'am, specifically, sorry to interrupt you, talking about the Afghan farmers, their income, the report says, has tripled after this ban came into place. So 3 times of what they were earning last year.
That's, remarkable. And Anand, if I may take this to you, in the first phase of the Taliban being power and the Mujahideen before then, I understand that the drug trade played a very big role in sustaining the economy and sustaining the conflict within Afghanistan. Could you describe that a little bit to us about how that actually worked and what the role of the ISI was in propping this up?
Yeah, the role of the ISI, will start with that, because I know that you wrote a recent piece on that. So maybe in the first time around, there is no smoking gun evidence of an ISI involvement. But there were enough reports in the early days about trucks, NLC trucks ferrying narcotics from Afghanistan to the port in Karachi. You heard reports, this is hearsay from people, but then again, that is the nature of the beast. You can't get evidence that a lot of people had made money. Look at the leading lights in this trade. People like Haji Baluch and others are sitting in Karachi. They're the ones who, at this time around, last time around also they were, you'll find an increase, a direct correlation between the drugs and fishing trawlers coming out to fish in that area. And it isn't a cheap thing. It isn't easy to buy a fishing trawler and register it in Pakistan or wherever. But that was happening, and that's on the ISI front. On the Afghanistan front, yes, there was. They had no other sources of income. They needed the taxation for them was a big thing, getting revenue from taxation. And I've seen some of those clips which were used to the effect. I don't speak Pashto, but it was translated to the effect that Mr. So and so is got 25 kilos, precise amount. Okay, nothing that he's carrying a consignment. He is carrying 25 kilos from Kandahar to so-and-so place or whatever, and please give him normal language, protection and all that, and let him go through. That was the language that was used. It's a parallel economy which tends to flourish in these circumstances. Hawala, there is no other banking way. The Hawala trade and the Hawala trade, as you would know, is largely Indian and Pakistani run. This fuels terror. There are tribes. I won't use the name because this is going to be a little controversial. Tribes who are sole income or sole revenue is on narcotics. And I know one particular powerful tribe, which is Kandahar based, which has spread its people in two routes. One along the route up to Iran, and the other up to the Pakistan border, northeast, northeast side of Pakistan. That's a line, and it comes into a V at Kandahar. That Helmand stuff was going through in that area. So yeah, it is as you take your. I think this time around we've got a problem. I think the war on terror was really, when you have a war on terror, you take your eyes off the war on drugs. And there are such a strong correlation there too, that once that the war on terror has been reduced, you'll have now drug trade proliferating. There is a UN statistics which says that 43 groups are prevalent, and I don't think it's a UN, it's another finding somewhere. 43 terror groups are operating around the world, major groups, of which 19 are involved in the drug trade. And of the 19, they have got sophisticated stuff. Some of them have got submarines. So I'm not saying that Afghanistan is going to get a submarine anywhere, but that technology is for sale and they'll buy it and it'll come there.
Tara, that's a perfect point for me to segue to my next question, which is that, the whole point of the so-called war of terror on terror years from 9/11 afterwards was that we would stabilize Afghanistan, that these jihadi groups would be brought under control, that Pakistan would be stabilized and these jihadi groups would be slowly eradicated. Now, over the last few years, there's definitely been a sort of downtick in violence in Kashmir, but within Pakistan itself, of course, we are seeing quite the opposite, right? Jihadi groups resurfacing. Do you see this becoming a wider regional pattern now the United States has left Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense, I think you've got recently, there have been accusations of Islamic State attacks in Uzbekistan. There have been, there was this strange report about Tabligis going from Afghanistan into Kazakhstan. So it's all sort of seems to be spinning out of control, like you said. Not that there was any very great control to begin with, right? So the only thing is that Pakistan, of course, and the Tehrik-e-Taliban, and the fact, since if you don't mind me bringing this right now, Imran Khan was shot at, and the DGISI in his interview had pointed to the report from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government saying that the TTP might hit Imran Khan. And he kind of rubbished that. But I don't know what's going on, right? So it is really, really scary. In fact, coming back in that instance, back to the narcotics, you had this US veteran recently released in return for Bashir Nurzai, who's a drug dealer. Huge drug dealer. No? I mean, he was released recently. So it's not as if the US doesn't know the networks. It's been there for decades, and we know the US agents were involved, the CIA was involved. So there's what, like Anand says, that war on terror, in part, realistically overlook the drugs, because if you start, people are starving, you can't do anything. But this combine is so intricate, especially in Afghanistan, Pakistan, because let's face it, if they are the money from narcotics, which is mostly through Hawala, as you know, where is it being banked? It's certainly not being banked in the Swiss banks, right? Perhaps in Iran, I don't know. But since much of these guys are basically Pakistanis, they've been in Pakistan for years. Where else would they bring the money back? But you have the FATF saying Pakistan is now off the grey list. So the whole thing is getting really murky. I mean, have they got even more sophisticated in how they move their money? As the report says, the amount of money which is generated is only a tenth of what it could actually generate at the end point. We are talking big money. So it's not just a couple of farmers or a couple of bearded Taliban guys. There are lots of other people involved. So naturally, it's the region then gets wider and wider. That's what I'm trying to say.
The report mentions that this money, the tripling of income reaching 1.4 billion, is just a fraction of what is actually going on with relation to the packaging, transport, and then illicit transfer of the contraband all over the world.
That's quite staggering. I mean, Anand, a question for you. I mean, when you dealt with jihadi groups and other terrorist groups over the years, one of the things that often used to be said is that there are very sophisticated syndicates and business interests sort of underpinning some of this. You had Dawood Ibrahim, of course, as the best known example of someone who invested money in Dubai and in East Africa and God knows where else. But to what extent do terrorist groups or jihadi insurgencies, to what extent are they dependent on the kind of revenues that come from drugs and other kinds of organized crime?
I think the drugs fuel the uncertainty, the disturbed situation. That's it. I think that's a bit of a minor requirement. This type of disturbed conditions, as is prevalent in Afghanistan, helps the drug trade. And I'm not too sure. I don't think there is any concrete analysis of what or understanding of how much of it is going into fueling this. But yes, it does help. You'll suddenly find one or two classic examples is you'll suddenly find the local man who is probably giving you some sort of protection, sporting a new Pajero. And, that's the sort of a giveaway. And he's got, there are other ways of looking at ascertaining. There's no bank. So he can't obviously put it in a bank. He takes it in the form of gifts. And probably sports better weaponry or whatever. But that's in Afghanistan. The sophistication is really in other areas where you'll find, I did mention briefly about the submarine, but that's not relevant in our sense of the word. But drones are. You already find drones being used for dropping weapons. You'll find growing use of drones in taking drugs across, maybe even from the high seas. I don't know much about the drone technology, whether we have that sort of, whether fishing boats can launch stuff across and whether they'll be that accurate, but that's in the realm of a possibility. Praveen, I want to go into one area which is probably more relevant here. Is probably something we can talk about. It is the Colombian model. Colombia has handled it in a much better way than they had in the past. And there was a recent study when I say recent, about 2-3 years ago, I think the Colombian minister who handles this issue, somebody called Sergio Jaramillo, or some name like that. What he had projected is that what he had said in a sense is that as the world starts ignoring a region, drugs will naturally increase. He wasn't talking about Afghanistan, he was talking about Colombia. He says that what they require is aid. And aid in the right form and in the right place. It shouldn't be widely spread. And he said, very frankly, the problem in Colombia can be better handled, better resolved if there is a free trade agreement with the US. That's it. He was talking about an engagement. I found that I read that about 2 years ago, and I found it valid that in Afghanistan, the more we ignore them, the more we get. How are we going to engage with them is the problem that we have in that's another area.
Tara, would you have any thoughts on whether engagement is the way forward? This is, of course, India has begun some sort of very small-scale diplomatic outreach to the Taliban. But there's a great deal of division within the global community. Will the Taliban do anything in return for engagement? Will they help with drugs and terrorism? Will they obey international norms on, say, the education of girls? I was wondering what your thoughts might be on this.
Everybody is engaging with the Taliban. Let's face it, everybody. Now, whether you want to call it recognition or whatever, that's a different issue. But we really have no choice. I mean, you see the Afghans, the wider Afghan people, they say, why are you talking to the Taliban? You are betraying us, but at the same time, they want you to do something about the Taliban. Now you can't, how do you balance this? If you want to do something with them, then you have to engage with them.
Right.
Engaging with them means what? Which means if we are going to talk about the education of women, for example, if you can get that in, then the nature of Taliban starts changing. And that is what you want. So I think drugs is a long way off, Praveen. We are not even going to touch that anytime in the near future, because it's a question of their people's, they're as it is starving. Now, if you take away drugs, what's going to happen next? So that is a really, really long this thing. But what we could there's something actually I wanted to say is that, there are not many seizures in Pakistan. Have you noticed? Yet it is one now and then you'll find an official report saying, we've got these tons of narcotics at Torkham border. But inside Pakistan, nobody's catching drugs. I find that very curious. Then, if you recall, was it last year that they had that massive protest in Gwadar, led by a Jamaat-e-Islami guy, and he was, one of the demands of the Gwadar people is give us control of Torkham. And who controls Torkham? The Frontier Corps. The Frontier Corps, is engaged in everything. So this is a nice little business going on. You were talking about how it operates. Everybody takes a cut as this, even regular trucks which go up and down. But in terms of narcotics, the question is, who's going to blow the whistle? No, clearly nobody in Pakistan is doing it, yet it is the major gateway. The recent we've had, I think, some amazing figures, Sri Lankans and us. Three operations with about 400 plus kg of heroin recovered, high quality heroin coming from Afghanistan, Iran. It's not just Pakistan businessman, but that circle that has always been the drug sort of triangle. So this is it's a sort of like trading in, like selling cigarettes or something. It's that simple. Nobody who's going to stop you.
One astounding figure from United Nations statistics, which surprised me, and I think you'd have seen it, is that despite, the world's navies combing the Indian Ocean and satellite surveillance of Afghanistan, everything, I think the recoveries are just less than a fifth of the production, right?
Yeah. The recoveries, there's a big incoherence between the rate of increase in cultivation and the recoveries that are coming in. It doesn't make sense.
Which means a lot of it is basically ending up wherever people want to sell it. Anand, I'll give you the final question. You dealt with the conduct of Indian policy in the Taliban years. Do you see the Taliban now as more willing to deliver on some of their counter-terrorism and counter-narcotics promises? Or is this really the same old game in, if you like, new clothes? There were people back in the 90s who said we should engage with the Taliban because we have these issues to resolve. There were people who said we shouldn't. What do we learn from our experience of last time around?
Last time around, they made no promises or assurances. They could have probably done it if it had got them some benefit. But let's not forget, even in Kabul today, the Taliban is not a monolith in that sense. Assurances are in a large way meaningless. You can engage with one lot. Maybe if you're engaging with the primary lot, that is brother and gang. I'm not talking about the Haqqani gang. You could probably try and contain the production. You could probably get some assurances which matter, and insofar as Kandahar goes. But I do not think that the writ of the Taliban will extend on the issue of narcotics even to Helmand. Helmand is 50% of the crop of the overall figure. Helmand and all those areas, Kandahar, that area counts for 60-65% of.
You said it was 73. This time 73 Helmand. The southwest province.
The southeast, south and southeast area. Now, also remember, Praveen, that Afghanistan historically has never had enough money for itself. If you go back into history, the raids and coming into Indian, in the ancient times are all to raise revenue. Even, I think, except for a brief period in the last century, perhaps between the First and Second World War or whatever. I don't now remember they have never really had enough money for themselves. And Afghanistan cannot feed itself. It doesn't have enough thing. So they are dependent on other sources. They have to depend on some other sources of income, and narcotics fills a breach. If you're going to go and curb their cocaine fields, okay, you can cut down that, but they'll switch to chemical drugs. It's inevitable.
I can't resist, but a last question for you, Tara, and I promise this will be really the last question. In Pakistan's own interest, having survived these terrible years leading up to 9/11, Pakistan's seen that instability in Afghanistan has given it a terrible addiction problem domestically, has corrupted its political system, has created a sort of set of vested interests, has made it awash with small arms, which present a problem for the army. Do you see the Pakistan army as finally drawing the right lessons from that experience? Or is the lure of quick money going to guide its decision making? Even after the tragic events we've seen today with yet another former Pakistani Prime Minister almost being killed?
No, I think Pakistanis are kind of used to this kind of thing. They keep getting their leaders bumped off or hung up or imprisoned or something like that. But that's apart, Praveen, I would assume, General Bajwa has twice now called for peace. He's called for regional thing, blah, blah, blah. They can at least see that the country is going to pieces. Whether they would want to take on the narcotics angle is another. Once, by the way, earlier they had an anti-narcotics force, which was very good. This is at least about 8 to 9 years back. They were extremely efficient when it was run by the army. Then for whatever reason, they melted away. There's another aspect. We are also awash with drugs. Don't forget. It's a terrible situation and we are not acknowledging it because our own narcotics forces just don't have the strength to take it on. Delhi, look at Delhi. So this is something actually you should cooperate with Pakistan if and when you decide to talk to them. This is something both countries would be interested in dealing with because it affects their own societies, affecting them very badly. But whether then, a paramilitary force in Pakistan, whom I won't name, will want to take it on is another matter because that guy is making money. So you see, it's that disconnect which is perpetually a problem.
I'll give the last word to my colleague Suchet, who's researched this report really thoroughly. Suchet, when you read through these UN documents and looked, at the wider picture on this, did you get the sense that the nation states involved in this sort of controversy, and after all, it's the Western powers who eventually buy these drugs at the highest prices. Did you get the sense that there's going to be some sort of unity of purpose around this, or that governments are basically willing to live with it?
So, I assume that just with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, Justin, the way it happened, it just seems that the West collectively in the US may have sort of abandoned the idea of what's going on there in the interim. Now, I guess it'll take a few years for this drug trade to increase, the quantities to reach the West in copious amounts, and then maybe, like what we saw after NAFTA in America with Colombia, Mexico, then they start maybe thinking, war on drugs. Perhaps that's a route which might go down later. I don't know. So, very pessimistic assessments from both my guests, Anand Arni and Tara Kartha, as well as my colleague Suchet Vir Singh. Thank you very much for joining Crosshairs again. And we'll be back next week. Thank you so much. Thank you.